How's it going, everybody? This is Aaron the Pedantic, and I'm sure you're looking at this video and saying, what the fuck happened to your face? Well, just to quickly get that out of the way, basically I had a work thing I needed to do, and I tried to shave in order to, well, not shave, I was trying to trim my beard in order to be able to do that and, not look unprofessional. And my trimmer basically died in the middle of me doing it. So I only had a few hours before I had to go up and do the thing because it was kind of sprung on me out of nowhere. And I had to use a combination of scissors and, just like a straight razor in order to basically, finish the job that I wasn't even trying to do in the first place necessarily. I still wanted my fucking beard. I miss my beard. I don't like looking like a shaved rat or something. Anyway, so that's what happened to me. But today I kind of wanted to talk about something because there have been, as always, there are always tons of very interesting discussions happening online regarding role-playing games and play styles and stuff like that. And one of the things that I kind of touched on a while back when I did my blog post entitled Why OSR is I was talking about the what I call the three approaches. Now, this is something that has been touched on many times by many people, and often in much better ways than I do it. So this is really just kind of my own little interpretation of the argument and trying to wrap my head around it, which tends to be what a lot of what I talk about is, because I don't consider myself an expert or anything like that. I'm just a guy who is an enthusiast, has lots of opinions. But in any case, so the three approaches. You've probably heard of GNS theory if you are watching this channel, because you're probably a very enlightened individual. But if not, that's a thing. And this is kind of going along the same idea. And that is that there are generally three different ways that people use role-playing games. Three different ways that people go about doing it in order to get the desired results, that they want from the game. So the first one is what I call the mechanic approach. Now, this is in GNS theory. This would be the gamist approach. So basically, the concept is you have these mechanics that are built into the system, and basically the way that you get your joy out of the game is from using these very explicitly written rules in a creative way to maximize your output. So it is a way of playing that I think is exemplified by, I would say, 3rd edition, definitely I would say as well 4th edition D&D, just because of the fact that they kind of require a lot of esoteric understanding of how the system works in order to get the most out of it. That's why whenever you have people that play 3rd edition, or Pathfinder, a lot of times if they are a group that has been working together for a long time and they have a great understanding of the system, they are going to flow very well. And it's very hard to work new people into those kind of groups. I don't want to get into all that kind of stuff, but basically that is kind of where they get their joy out of it. Sometimes to a lesser extent, well, not to a lesser extent, I'd say to equal extent, a lot of people just love the customization aspect because of the fact that there is so much that you can use built into the system to, have creative ways of dealing with situations. Whenever it is tacked on to character customization, it allows them to have a maximum form of expression. They may not be min-maxers, but they may just have tons of support for creating a very particular kind of character. And that might be something that really, is very important to them. And I'd like to mention here that these three approaches don't have to be disparate. They can be combined for greater effect. But there tends to be kind of a sliding scale with some of it. So That is the mechanic or gamist approach. So then you have the storyteller approach, which is also known as the narrativist approach. So this is the one that is going to be all about trying to create an entertaining, dramatic story. You try and focus on the narrative aspects of the game, and you do so basically kind of at the expense of trying to use literal interpretations of how things are supposed to work. That would be kind of the gamist and possibly simulationist side. Those would necessarily be in contrast with this narrativist approach because of the fact that they end up getting in the way. So you would opt for more narrative solutions to things. This is really, I feel like, one of the more growing aspects of the hobby. It's been around for a while, ever since the storyteller system debuted and all that kind of stuff. People have been really pushing it. The indie scene is very, very focused on narrativist, resolutions and considerations. But as far as D&D goes, I would say that 5th edition, there are a lot of people that use it in a very narrativist lens, which is interesting. So there is that. And then you have the kind of like the place where I call home for the most part, and that is the simulationist approach. That is for the GNS theory version. I call it the immersionist approach because I feel like simulation isn't exactly the most apt term due to the fact that this kind of axis also includes people that are playing rules-light games. And ultimately, whenever you are playing a rules-light game, you aren't typically trying to think, okay, how can I feel like simulation would kind of imply a sense of extreme scripting. Basically, this would be trying to formulate the mechanics in such a way that it tries to push out any eventualities that are unrealistic. So, I mean, in a way that could be a false interpretation, especially considering what do you consider a simulationist approach to a fantasy thing? How do you quantify realism in a fantasy world, that kind of thing? But at the same time, the reason for my wanting to frame it as immersion rather than simulation is because of the fact that sometimes there are things that we adjudicate in a rules-light game that are going to be not necessarily the most realistic or plausible outcome, but it's going to be something that is quite plausible and it doesn't defy plausibility, but at the same time, it might be extremely uncommon kind of thing. I feel like if we were trying to really graft in the simulation, that a lot of those eventualities would be factored out. It's just you have to do it to an extent that you don't break someone's suspension of disbelief, which I've had a few conversations that were really interesting about how basically we have different lines that we put that on. It might be that somebody's suspension of disbelief is lost whenever they're able to carry, 5 or 6 weapons and tons of equipment. And it just so happens to be that it doesn't go over their allotted weight, that kind of thing. Or it might be something as simple as, you're playing as a monk who is able to punch a dragon to death. That might be a point for somebody where they're like, oh, wait, what? And those are going to vary from person to person. But basically what I wanted to point out is that those tend to be kind of the approaches that people take, where they try and figure out what do they want from this experience. And I think that most of the arguments that are had regarding tabletop role-playing games are centered around where on that kind of spectrum. It's not even a spectrum really, because it's kind of 3 points. Where on that Venn diagram, I guess, would you be exactly? Like where do you put your emphasis? And the interesting thing is that there seem to be ways to facilitate that kind of joy for everyone if you're careful, if you make those kinds of considerations. But at the same time, there are games that specifically cater to 1 or 2, but definitely not 3 of these types of players. So, for example, the OSR is going to cater most heavily, I would say, to the people that are more interested in simulation, if we're using the GNS, which I probably will. I was intending not to, but I'm more familiar with that than I am my own terminology I came up with. I'm familiar with it. It's like it doesn't come out. You don't use your own jargon to talk to everybody else because they won't know what you're talking about necessarily. So the OSR kind of caters most to that, I would say. It can have a slight bent toward the gamist approach, very slight, and I say so because of the fact that there are some components that can be, the player skill is very heavily emphasized, and part of that does require knowing what is a complete waste and what is not. And a lot of times the way that translates in OSR games, because of the fact that customization is not a huge emphasis, you usually just kind of get what you get, would be like spell choice, because some spells are just more effective than others in most situations. We all know that there are certain spells you just don't get because they're just not going to do much, typically. So that is why I would say it tends to kind of cater to those. Most of the indie games that are out are probably going to cater. I say most of the indie games. Most of the games that consider themselves like a good story game, they're going to obviously cater to the narrativist, but they may, I would say, have like a slight edge on the simulationist as opposed to the gamist, depending on what kind of approach they take. Because I've seen games that say, look, we're doing a story, and I have like kind of like an outline, for how the game is going to go, how the plot's going to go. And then, you push the story along. That is something that would be abhorrent, I would say, to the simulationist. But games like Powered by the Apocalypse, or Apocalypse World is what I was going to say, but Powered by the Apocalypse and other games like that, where they say there is no plot, basically you just follow the fiction, I feel like those shouldn't be quite as abhorrent to the simulationist, because basically you're trying to be immersed in your character. And that's what you do. You just follow what your character is doing, and everyone is kind of like going along by the seat of their pants. So I feel like it's more whenever you're playing for the story and guiding things into that kind of story perspective that you're getting away from that. So basically, and this has been a whole ramble, and I'm sorry, but what I wanted to get to is this discussion I had where this one person was talking about how whenever they play D&D, they like to, or they think that you should, this was a tip, they think that you should basically not use average HP for monsters, which I think is a good idea, but instead they propose that basically you decide if it's been hit enough to be dead. And that's just, it's a very arbitrary way of playing, or making that decision, I should say. It puts a lot of emphasis on what the DM believes is appropriate. And so whenever I, look at that, it's clear, it's very clear that we have a very different idea of how things should go. And this is because of what I find to be fun whenever I'm playing my games. So whenever I'm playing my games, I'm not interested in not interested in what makes a good story at all. If my character dies prematurely, like even if it's right after I've rolled them and we just started playing, so long as I had ample opportunity to use my agency as a character, or at least the appropriate amount of agency, I should say, then I'm satisfied. Even if there's an abrupt death, it has no dramatic value to it. It has no story that sounds good, anything like that. That's not why I play the game, so it doesn't bother me if that happens. Now, there are a lot of people that disagree with that. They feel like, well, if I have set up this kind of stuff to happen, and if the monster is going to live too long, and basically people are getting bored, then the next hit's going to kill it. Or if I set up this encounter and I really played it up, and the team just blasts the thing into oblivion, I shouldn't let it die, because then it's anticlimactic. This is something that you see often. A lot of people are suggesting that this is how you should approach things, and really, this is because to them the ultimate barometer is fun. That's not really why I play, ironically. I know it's a game, but I don't really play for fun necessarily. I play for an experience. And that's what kind of like, to me, where the simulationist in me is coming to surface. Encumbrance and things like that. Are they fun? It depends on how you define fun. Basically what I get out of stuff like that is I get the ability to have more valuable choices than I need to make. And that's ultimately how I get my fun, is making these choices and seeing the ramifications play out in a way that's plausible. So whenever you have a referee that is being arbitrary with how things play out, it starts to really affect how I can have fun, because then it kind of makes it as though my choices didn't really have as much impact as they could. There are some other ramifications that I think are interesting as well. If someone were to, for instance, say, well, the monster, it doesn't need to die yet. It's been too soon. It's too soon. The combat just hasn't been going on long enough, and I really want this to play out more. Well, so what do you do then if you let the monster live longer, but then you end up, unleashing a whole, flurry of powerful hits on a PC, and you kill them, even though the monster should technically already be dead? This is, to me, that would be a very gross thing to happen. And I think that what would be the common, recommendation would be, well, fudge it so that way they don't die, or have spare them somehow because they didn't earn the death. And that's kind of where I want to point out that I find it kind of hypocritical in a way, because I believe in, all of this could be a straw man, so bear with me. I believe that they would say, don't let a PC die because you wanted to make the combat less anticlimactic, so you let the creature live longer. Because usually there is kind of a code of ethics that everybody goes by, even if they disagree on, like where all of their lines are and stuff like that. I don't know of any DMs that are just like going to be happy with themselves going on a power trip. I can't tell, did it stop recording or not? I think it's still recording. So we're just gonna, yeah, it's still going. Okay. Sorry. It just said recorded 1 gigabyte and then it stopped ticking up, but I had to look down at the length. Anyway. So the fact of the matter is that I believe that, on the other hand, so if they are not going to let a PC die as a result of what they're doing, but then that basically means that the thing is only alive for show, and it's only still alive so that it can do something that is interesting, and at that point, really you're You're just being an entertainer at that point. And that's not really what that's not necessarily the role of the DM, in my opinion. I believe that the DM is a performative task, DMing, in a way, because you are having to describe the scenarios. You're having to act as the NPCs. You're having to do all these things. So there is a performative aspect to it. However, for a player like me, the ultimate job of the referee is to be impartial and to present the world as it is and let me interact with it in a way that makes sense. So, to that end, whenever you have someone who's being arbitrary for the sake of a story or for the sake of fun, quote unquote, it's a problem. So, yeah. If the PC is going to not die, if you're not going to allow it, then like it just the whole thing is just, did we really earn that last victory we had? Did we really earn that death that we had? Like, it puts everything into question whenever you start to see the glitches in the matrix, and it's not just with this kind of situation. There are these kinds of things that are used all the time. There's the general case of illusionism that is often used, which is basically, you're going to end up at the place that I want you to end up, regardless of how you go. I'm going to give you the illusion of choice to get there. But you're still going to get in the same place. Really, the choices that they give you as a player are, what kind of actions you use, and then, like, maybe on a very small level, what kinds of choices you make. But they tend to view them as branching paths on a prescripted narrative rather than a true, just plot of an environment, and then, like, just see how it plays out. So there's a very strong differences there on how we view things and how we value the game. And most arguments that I see that are pretty bad, like, people tend to be really ugly about it. And I wholeheartedly condemn any kind of just dickishness over how people play the game. That seems to be where it all stems from. And if you look at why do I play D&D, like, what do I enjoy out of the game, I think that is how you will find out exactly, where you are going to stand on 99% of these issues. At least that's how it was for me. I enjoy planning. I enjoy making choices. I also enjoy portraying my characters. So that's kind of I would say, a more modern RPG thing. From what I understand, there are some people back in the day that used to do it too, a lot. But it's just kind of like not everybody does it. And yeah, I feel like I'm kind of rambling at this point, which is nothing terribly new. But I guess what I would try, and I usually try and say, what have we learned today, kids? For me, I guess I would say, try to understand, before you respond to somebody with a lot of vitriol about how they run the game and say they're a horrible dungeon master or anything like that. Like, try and figure out if maybe the difference of opinion that you have is based on or originates from why you play the game, because 9 times out of 10 that seems to be where things really go off the rails. And ultimately, what's the point in trying to convince someone that they're playing the game wrong when they don't enjoy the same stuff that you do? There's not really much point. So we shouldn't bother. Instead, what we should do is say, hey, so this is how you do it. This is how I do it. And this is why I do it this way. And maybe there can be some kind of understanding. And I think that is something that will cause more positive things in the hobby, because in a lot of situations I've noticed people just don't understand what the other side is really about. They pretty much just tend to get very straw man kind of arguments, posed by people that already disagree with the position that's being presented. And that's not, it doesn't help anybody. So, yeah. I think that's it for today. Tomorrow is an election day. Wow. Which means, well, I would say which means absolutely nothing to the rest of the world, but this this is America. So, it's not kind of like how it is with reciprocating, where Americans such as myself, look on to what's happening in the rest of the world with not disinterest, but I would say just kind of like curiosity, but not a whole lot of investment, I would say. From people that I know internationally, they seem to be all like, well, this is important stuff, So I'm curious to see how it's going to play out. But considering I don't do the whole political stuff on my my channels, then I'm not going to go into the election. But if anybody ever wants Aaron the Pedantic's opinions on American politics and stuff like that, maybe that's something that we can do sometime. I actually told Chelsea that I thought it would be fun to do a podcast day where we just hash out the election. But now it's too late, really, because I was thinking, I could argue for one side and she could argue for the other side, because we don't, we have very similar opinions, but we kind of diverge on certain points. And I could really probably argue for both sides pretty well, because I'm a filthy centrist. But in any case, yeah, so the rambling has gone off the rails at this point. So tomorrow night we should be having our podcast. I'm kind of debating it because of the fact that I'm going to have to try and get to a place where I can vote and work. So with all those kinds of things, I don't know how much time I'm going to have. But if we don't do it tomorrow night, then I will be able to do it next week. So, and I am looking for guests. So if you're somebody who has a strong opinions, or if you do any kind of work in the hobby, and you'd like to jump on the podcast and discuss something, that would be awesome. I'm always looking to hear perspectives from people that know more about certain things than I do, which is a lot of things. So, yeah, everybody please be safe. Have a great week. It's gonna be interesting how things transpire the next few days, and just hang in there, I guess, is all I can say. And I'm looking forward to positive discussions as always. So y'all take it easy, and thanks so much for stopping by.